Hi there, I'm Ray and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. This is actually an older reading vlog which I hadn't got around to editing, however it is full of lots of cosy autumnal vibes with lots of rain, and so I thought it would be quite a nice one to share now rather than just deleting all of the filming that I did at some point. So this is actually from last autumn and I start off by reading The Salt Path by Raynor Winn. Hope you enjoy.
Give up everything that I own. Yeah, I'd give it all up now just to be with you somehow. Unexpected love was found. You're the rose in a garden, and it shows if I'm honest. You're the leaves in mid-August.
I'm just going to make dinner. I'm going to make this pasta, which I have made quite a few times in the past. It's really tasty, except that I don't have half the ingredients, so I'm making a slightly adapted version of it. We will see how that goes, and I'm going to start listening to The Salt Path, which is the memoir about a couple who get forced out of their home in the UK and choose to walk along the coast. I think quite a lot of people have read this already, so if you've read it, I'd be really intrigued to know what you thought of it. I haven't read a memoir for a long time, and I always tend to enjoy them far more than I anticipate them going to, so I'm looking forward to it.
Hey there, it's Wednesday morning, and I'm just about to go to the police station to try and get, like, the Congolese equivalent of a DBS check, basically just a certificate to say that I have no criminal record here. Which is fine because I don't have a criminal record here, but I'm not quite sure exactly where the police station is or who I need to talk to about it. So fingers crossed for me that goes well. Apparently they only accept people between the hours of 9:30 and 10 in the morning, so it is currently 9:10. According to Google Maps, the police station is very close. Hopefully this will go well. I really hope that I can get this done, because if I don't get it done, I'm not quite sure what to do next. I've brought When Breath Becomes Air with me to start reading. I didn't know that we had this book. I literally was doing some tidying up and I found it. It must be Tom's. I have been wanting to read it since it came out. Generally, like, memoir is the kind of nonfiction that I really enjoy reading. So if I end up sitting around for ages, which I feel is a possibility, then at least I've got an interesting book to start reading.
Days without water along the sun-soaked road. We crossed over borders to get where we are, and it's all for you. It's all for you. It's all for you. It's all for you. I did it all for you. It's all for you. It's all for you. It's all for you.
So I've been doing lots of unpacking and cooking and sorting things out, the kind of activities that allow you to listen to an audiobook in the background, which is really lovely, and I finished The Salt Path by Raynor Winn. I was super impressed by this, so I think in my November TBR I didn't quite give an accurate view of what this book was about. I thought it was about an elderly couple who walked the perimeter of the whole of the UK after they couldn't afford to pay the mortgage on their home. It's kind of like that, but just ever so slightly different. So the couple are actually more like middle-aged, I guess. I think they're around 50, and they lose their home because of a court case which has gone wrong against them, where even though they were on the right side of justice, they believe they didn't have access to enough financial aid in order to prove their case, and they ended up having to give up their home and all their belongings, all their money, because they lost this court case. At the same time, they find out that Raynor's husband, who is called Moth, is terminally ill, and they are just out of their house. They don't know what to do, and so they decide to walk along the southwest coastal path, which goes around like the Cornwall, Devon part of the UK and is 560 odd miles long. It's a story about their walk on that path, and it's the story about them coming to terms with this huge grief and this huge change in their life circumstances. And I honestly just found it really uplifting and moving. It was a very easy listen. It would have been a very easy read. Language wasn't complicated, but it was pleasant. There was some nature writing in there. There were some interesting facts about parts of the UK as you went through. But it was also just a really fascinating examination of homelessness, of the lack of enough support in the UK for people who are in various vulnerable situations. And the thing which surprised me the most, which I hadn't known this story was going to be, I think it was a real testament to the enduring power of love, because the married couple go through this awful situation, but throughout it all they really depend upon and support and love one another. And it was so lovely to see how that helped them through this awful situation, and how the little jests and jokes and exchanges between them and observations, how they help them to survive what is objectively just, you know, something that is hardly imaginable. It definitely made me feel an awful lot more empathy for people who are homeless. It definitely did a wonderful job of challenging the stereotypical view of homeless people as drug addicts, and replaced that with a more level perspective of no, homeless people are people who have been extremely unfortunate in life, who the system has failed, who've slipped through the net, and who don't have anywhere else to go, don't have any friends, any relatives, or even if they do have friends and relatives, that, you know, they're couch surfing, they're not comfortable, they require and need a space of their own in order to feel human. It portrayed all of that beautifully, but also the healing power of nature. And yeah, overall it was just a really uplifting, warm book. Highly recommend, really enjoyed it. For the rest of the week I'm going to be focusing on reading Turning Point on my Kindle by Chloe Angyal. This is a book about ballet, about the many faults in the ballet institutional system, you know, the fact that it is racist, misogynistic in many ways, the fact that it's inaccessible to people who are poor, and about what can be done in order to change that and improve the situation. So that's something I'm really looking forward to. Ballet is a massive passion of mine, so I think that'll be a really fascinating read.
Nights without sleeping, 'cause you fear the night, and days without eating, 'cause it ain't enough for two, and it's all for you, it's all for you, it's all for you, it's all for you. I did it all for you. It's all for you. It's all for you. It's all for you.
Hey there, it's Sunday and I have had a proper day of reading. Yesterday I went out with a friend for some celebratory drinks for my new job, and today I've been feeling a little bit fragile. So I decided to spend the day just curled up on the sofa reading, and I read for hours on end, and I've completely finished Turning Point by Chloe Angyal. The process of reading for so long actually really reminded me that I love reading in long, extended chunks of time rather than just in like bits and pieces regularly. I think I'm actually more suited to less frequent, long chunks of reading, because you can really get into a book, you really get into a kind of flow state, and it reminded me that when I read like that, it kind of re-kickstarts my reading ability, and I then find it easier to also read in smaller parts in between longer reads. But I think for the last few months I just haven't had a single really long focused read, and I really enjoyed that feeling of reading for an extended amount of time. Unfortunately, I was not a huge fan of this book. Like, it was fine. It was a 2.5 star kind of read for me. So this book is called Turning Point: How a New Generation of Dancers is Saving Ballet from Itself, and it's about basically all of the problems with ballet as an institution, the fact that it has huge problems around gender, around race, around equality and accessibility, and a few other things on top of that. But what was a shame about it is that I just didn't feel like it really dug very deep into any of those issues, and it didn't really introduce me to anything that I wasn't already aware of, or go deeper about stuff that I was aware of in a way which I found fascinating. So if you take race, for example, it's very much an art form which is largely practiced by, and the gates of which are open to, white people, whereas people of colour have a lot more difficulty getting access to dance education, careers in dance, important positions in dance companies, positions as choreographers, as teachers, etc. But although it said these things, and it had a couple of examples of mothers of daughters who attended ballet classes and found it harder because they were a person of colour, there just wasn't really anything more that it drew on. Basically, I just wanted more depth out of this book, and it definitely left me wondering who this book was written for, because as somebody who's quite interested in ballet, I kind of felt like I already knew all of the things that were written about in this book. It didn't really cover any new ground for me, which made me think that it was kind of aimed at people who didn't know very much about ballet. But then I also just didn't think that someone who doesn't know very much about ballet is going to want to pick up a book about ballet. So what I was really hoping to get out of it, and it did this once, sadly only once, were examples of this thing about how a new generation is saving ballet from itself, examples of the way that people are now challenging the institution of ballet, challenging the classics, and recreating new ways in which ballet can exist and move and work in the world. And there were a few sort of fairly shallow examples given of this. There was like an example of a ballet company which was challenging traditional gender norms and having kind of more gender fluidity in the way that it portrayed dance. There was one example which was of the kind of thing I wish this book had been full of how a black female choreographer had changed the story of a traditional ballet of Giselle and made it a story which challenged the power of men rather than accepting the power of men, because the author makes the point that all of the traditional ballets are very much written by men, they're choreographed by men, and you end up with this weird situation where, although ballet is a largely female art form in terms of women mostly practice it, men hold all the power, and men are therefore kind of like writing the women who then perform this art form. And that looked a little bit in depth about how she'd changed the story of Giselle, which was interesting. But this one example was used twice in the book, and there were no other equivalent examples. Whereas even with my not massive knowledge of ballet and choreographers, I am aware of other choreographers who are challenging traditional stories. So for example, tonight I'm gonna have some friends around and watch Matthew Vaughan's Sleeping Beauty. This is absolutely my favourite thing, one of my favourite things that I've ever seen on stage. I really love it, and I can watch this like a kid. I can watch this and then just want to go back to the beginning and watch it all over again as a beautiful retelling of the story of Sleeping Beauty. This isn't a particularly good example of somebody changing the story of Sleeping Beauty in a way which is more diverse, although the heroine, Aurora, is significantly more feisty in this than she is in the traditional classical ballet. But the choreographer Matthew Bourne has, for example, reimagined the story of Swan Lake as having a homosexual love affair at its centre rather than a traditionally heterosexual one. So I know that there are these examples of the way that choreographers are changing traditional ballets, and I find those really, really interesting. I thought that Turning Point was going to be full of examples like those. It really wasn't. It was readable, it was fine, I enjoyed it well enough, but it also reminded me why I tend to prioritise fiction reading over non-fiction reading in my life, because I'm sadly I don't feel like this was a great use of my time. I feel like reading the title and the blurb gave me absolutely as much as spending 7 hours of my time reading the content of the book gave me, which is just quite a sad and frustrating way to feel after you've invested all that time in reading something. So that was annoying. Anyway, it's been nice to spend the day reading, even if it wasn't the best book that I've ever read. Thank you ever so much for following through my week with me. I hope that you enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you soon in another video. Bye bye.